Welcome to World Epic History. Today, we step into one of the darkest chapters of the Roman Empire, an age of turmoil, betrayal, and relentless war. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome was torn apart not by foreign invaders, but by its own ambition. Emperors rose and fell in rapid succession, often slain by their own soldiers. Civil wars erupted across provinces, while barbarian tribes pressed on weakened frontiers. This era, known as the crisis of the 3rd century, shattered the unity of Rome. The empire fractured into rival states, its glory dimmed, and its survival hung by a thread. This is the story of how civil strife nearly destroyed the eternal empire. The year 235 AD marked the dawn of turmoil in ancient Rome. Emperor Severus Alexander fell to his own soldiers, sparking a chain of instability. From this moment, the crisis of the 3rd century began. The empire, once secure, now faced endless Roman civil wars, invasions, and economic decline. What followed was not just political strife, it was the beginning of an ancient Rome collapse that threatened the empire's very existence. With Alexander gone, Maximinus Thrax rose as emperor, the first of many soldier kings. His reign was marked by brutal military campaigns and mistrust of the Senate. Yet his power rested on fear, not stability. Civil wars ignited across the empire as generals fought for the throne. The crisis of the 3rd century had begun to tear Rome apart, leaving citizens uncertain if order would ever return. From 235 to 284 AD, more than 20 emperors rose and fell, many lasting only months. This revolving door of rulers deepened the Roman civil war. Armies chose emperors, then abandoned them. Each defeat, each betrayal, chipped away at Rome's strength. What was once the proud empire of Augustus now looked fragile, divided, and vulnerable to collapse. Ancient Rome had entered an age of chaos. External threats struck while Rome battled itself. Germanic tribes crossed the weakened frontiers, plundering towns and fields. In the east, the Sassanid Persians rose in strength, capturing Roman cities and humiliating emperors. With civil war raging inside and invasions outside, the crisis of the 3rd century grew into a perfect storm. The dream of eternal Rome now trembled on the edge of collapse. The Roman economy collapsed under pressure. Trade routes were disrupted, coinage was devalued, and inflation soared. Farmers abandoned fields, while cities shrank in despair. What had once been the wealthiest empire in the world now struggled to feed its people. The crisis of the 3rd century was no longer just about emperors and civil wars. It was about the survival of Rome itself. The empire fragmented under pressure. Rival generals carved out their own dominions, ignoring Rome's authority. In Gaul, breakaway states formed. In the east, Palmyra rose in defiance. These fractures revealed that the Roman civil wars were no longer isolated. They threatened to split the empire forever. The crisis of the 3rd century exposed the deep wounds of ancient Rome collapse, turning unity into distant memory. The Gallic Empire emerged in 260 AD, led by Postumus. It controlled Gaul, Britain, and parts of Spain. For 14 years, it operated as a rival empire with its own army and institutions. Though temporary, Its existence symbolized Rome's collapse into fragmentation. The crisis of the 3rd century had turned the once united empire into competing states, each claiming to be the true heir of Rome. Meanwhile, in the east, Queen Zenobia of Palmyra rose in glory. Her armies swept through Egypt and Asia Minor, creating a Palmyrene empire that rivaled Rome itself. Though short-lived, Zenobia's defiance exposed the fragility of Roman power. The empire's civil wars and collapse of authority meant that once loyal provinces could now stand alone. Ancient Rome's unity crumbled under the weight of ambition and survival. While provinces broke away, emperors still fought among themselves. The Roman civil war became endless, each general crowned by soldiers, each one overthrown by betrayal. In this storm of shifting loyalties, no ruler could secure lasting peace. The crisis of the 3rd century turned the imperial purple into a death sentence. Emperors lived in fear, for their reigns were measured in months, not decades. Valerian's fate in 260 AD shocked the empire. Captured alive by the Persians, he became the only Roman emperor paraded as a prisoner. His humiliation symbolized Rome's weakness. While emperors vanished in civil wars, foreign powers grew bold. The crisis of the 3rd century revealed that ancient Rome collapse was not only internal, it was global, as enemies seized Rome's chaos as their opportunity. Gallienus, Valerian's son, tried to restore order. He reformed the army, relying on cavalry and creating mobile units to defend the empire. Yet despite his efforts, civil wars continued and emperors still rose in rebellion. Gallienus' reign showed both the resilience and the despair of Rome. In the midst of the crisis of the 3rd century, survival required innovation, but stability remained elusive. The plague returned to haunt ancient Rome. Disease spread through cities and camps, weakening armies and depopulating the countryside. At the same time, famine struck, and crops failed across the empire. The crisis of the 3rd century was not merely political, it was biological and environmental. Civil war, invasion, disease, and hunger combined into one catastrophe, driving Rome closer to collapse than ever before. By the 270s, Aurelian rose as a strong leader. He fought relentlessly to reunite the empire, defeating both the Gallic and Palmyrene empires. Known as Restorer of the World, his victories briefly halted Rome's fragmentation. Yet even his strength could not erase the memory of chaos. The crisis of the 3rd century showed that ancient Rome collapse had already weakened the empire's foundations. Aurelian built walls around Rome itself, a symbol of fear and defense. Never before had the Eternal City needed such protection. These walls stood as silent witnesses to the empire's decline. Even as civil wars calmed, the memory of invasion and collapse haunted the people. The crisis of the 3rd century had scarred Rome, proving that its glory was not invincible. But after Aurelian's death, instability returned. Short-lived emperors followed, each unable to secure lasting peace. Roman civil wars flared once more, proving that unity under Aurelian was fragile. The crisis of the 3rd century was relentless. It did not allow Rome to breathe. The empire staggered, wounded and weary, its collapse always just one assassination or betrayal away. By the late 270s, the empire still reeled from decades of crisis. Civil wars had drained Rome's strength, and foreign enemies still pressed the borders. Even victories felt temporary, as emperors struggled to hold what little control they had. The crisis of the 3rd century had transformed ancient Rome from a superpower into a wounded giant, staggering under the weight of its own collapse. The Senate, once powerful, became irrelevant. Real power belonged to the armies, and emperors were made or broken by soldiers. This military dominance deepened the cycle of Roman civil war. Ancient Rome collapse was not only political, but institutional. The very balance of Rome's system had been destroyed. The empire was now ruled by the sword, not the law. In the provinces, loyalty weakened. Governors and generals acted as kings, hoarding taxes and commanding private armies. The unity that had once defined Rome crumbled. The crisis of the 3rd century showed that the empire was too vast, too fractured to control. Civil war was not just about emperors, it was about the slow fragmentation of Rome itself. By 280 AD, the Roman people longed for stability. Generations had grown up knowing only war, famine, and disease. The crisis of the 3rd century was more than politics, it was daily survival. For the average Roman, collapse was not an idea in history books, but the harsh reality of empty granaries, ruined cities, and endless armies marching across their lands. Amid the chaos, Diocletian rose to power in 284 AD. His ascent marked the end of the crisis of the 3rd century, but it also confirmed Rome's transformation. Diocletian reorganized the empire, creating the tetrarchy, dividing rule among 4 emperors. It was a bold attempt to solve civil war by sharing power, yet it showed how far ancient Rome collapse had already gone. The tetrarchy gave temporary stability, but it admitted a bitter truth. Rome could no longer be ruled by one man. The crisis of the 3rd century had broken the illusion of eternal unity. Ancient Rome collapse was not a single moment, but a long erosion of power, trust, and tradition. The empire that emerged after 284 AD was forever changed. Looking back, the crisis of the 3rd century was a warning. It showed that empires, no matter how vast, could collapse from within as much as from without. Civil wars, ambition, and fear had nearly destroyed Rome. What saved it was not invincibility, but adaptation. Yet the scars of this century of crisis remained carved deep into Rome's history. For historians, this period revealed the fragility of power. The Roman Civil War was not a clash of ideals, but of ambition, where generals gambled with the fate of millions. The crisis of the 3rd century turned emperors into pawns of their armies, and citizens into victims of endless strife. Ancient Rome collapse was as much about people's suffering as about imperial politics. Though Rome survived the 3rd century, it was never the same. The crisis had broken the old empire's confidence. The eternal city would endure, but its foundations had cracked. Civil wars, invasions, and fragmentation had shown the world that Rome was mortal. The ancient Rome collapse had begun not in one day, but in the long bloody century between 235 and 284 AD. Thus ended the crisis of the 3rd century, a dark chapter in Roman history. It was an age of Roman civil war, foreign invasion, and ancient Rome collapse. From it rose a new empire under Diocletian, reformed yet forever scarred. The lesson was clear. Even the greatest empires can fracture when divided within. Thank you for joining this journey through history. Don't forget to subscribe for more epic stories.